Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Talks on Walks. And today we've got Simon Newman. It's lovely to have you, Simon. For everyone sort of watching and listening, could you just sort of tell us about yourself? So, who you are, about your job, who you've previously worked for, the roles you've had, and why you do what you do.
Thanks, George. So Simon Newman, I'm the Chief Exec of the Cyber Resilience Centre for London. We are part of a network of 9 centres that work with policing, academia and industry to support small and medium-sized businesses, as well as charities and third sector organisations, reduce their vulnerability to the most common types of cybercrime. Most of my career spent in the public sector, working in the civil service. I've also spent some time working overseas as well. And I guess the reason that I do this, I'm just really passionate about helping SMEs overcome what is arguably one of the biggest threats that they'll face in the current landscape.
Thank you. So you mentioned you've worked in the industry for a while. You probably know, especially with the insurance industry, who you probably worked with a fair bit, is that flexible working has sort of revolutionised the industry. The issue with that, though, is that teams are sort of falling victim to these cyber attacks, which can destroy their reputations and cost companies thousands in repairs or just trying to get back to where they were before. What can those in the industry do to prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think, since the pandemic hit the UK and other parts of the world, I think lots of organisations have adapted very well to have a more flexible working environment. So I think people are now much more skilled and aware of some of the risks that perhaps have been there from those early days. I think there's a couple of things I would say, first of all. Number one is about education. So insurers, like any other organisation, educating their staff about the importance of cyber resilience, helping them understand what to spot, what the current threats are, and how to deal with it. So I think education is really important. And I want to make the distinction between education and awareness. So for me, awareness is just about putting someone on a course every 12 months, you tick a few boxes and bingo, you've got yourself a certificate. Education goes beyond this. It's about embedding that learning into practice. And that moves me on to my second point, which is about culture. And culture is really, really important. So one of the things that we like to see are organizations that really embrace risk and also understand how they work within their teams to build that resilience. And what I mean by that is creating a culture, not of fear, but one where you actually reward good cybersecurity behavior. So the worst thing that can happen is a member of staff clicks on a link, and we all do it, let's face it. And
Sure.
if they are fearful of their job, they may not necessarily report that to the relevant people in their organization. So if you create a culture where you reward people for success, the smaller amount of time between someone clicking on something and notifying the right people, the less damage that's likely to do. So culture and education for me are really important. There's one other thing as well I'd say, which I think is also relevant, and that's about exercising. And what I mean by that sense is that, we know what cyber attacks can look like. Insurers are very good at understanding and have lots of access to some really great data. But what does it mean for your organization? How do you deal with it? How do you respond to it when it happens? So don't wait for it to happen. Exercise it regularly. Make sure everyone in the teams understands what their roles are when faced with a major cyber incident.
Sure. So it's really about providing that supportive environment for these, not only to grow in that environment, but also that they feel comfortable and that everyone can work together on that. I know you mentioned in there a little bit of clicking on links and how we all do it day to day. But like I say, the great solutions so far. But how can SMEs, especially those in the insurance industry, sort of prevent phishing becoming a common occurrence in their business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, phishing is by far the most common type of cyber attack that we see, and it's also the most disruptive. Most cyber criminals are opportunist. They rely on crises. I mean, we've seen with the pandemic, with perhaps the war in Ukraine, more recently, cost of living crisis, COVID recovery scams. They prey on people's anxieties around certain situations that are happening. And that seems to be a very, very effective approach that's used by criminals against lots of individuals and organizations. I think for me, the most important thing is what we call getting the basics right. So this is about every organization putting in place some really simple things that will reduce vulnerability to the most common types of cybercrime. So, things like having a good password policy, using two-factor or multi-factor verification, making sure your data is backed up properly, and you review that regularly. Ensuring that you download and update software updates as regularly as you can as well. Let's make it a little bit more difficult for the cyber criminal, and it's just by getting those very, very simple things right, will hopefully reduce the vulnerability significantly. So for me, that's, I think, what's really important. And just to sort of keep exercising and helping staff understand the types of latest threat that we see. Action Fraud are very good. They send out lots of information around the scams that they are seeing through the cyber resilience centres. Becoming a member, we send out information as well through our newsletters on some of the things that we're seeing as well, which comes directly from policing and government. So just keeping yourself aware of what's happening is another really good way of dealing with it.
Sure. And do you have any companies who have maybe adopted these approaches or become a bit more cyber resilient, who have seen good success from that, and especially combating phishing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in fact, it was an organisation I was working with a little while ago. I have about 120 staff in total, and they asked me to deliver a general cyber awareness course for them, just really highlighting for all their staff about some of the risks that were out there and how to avoid them. And we focus quite heavily on phishing, and in particularly things like invoice fraud, which is where perhaps a criminal impersonates a supplier to try and encourage the company to part with some money. 2 days after I delivered the course, one of the staff members remembered what they'd learned, saw an email that came in on a Friday afternoon that looked very suspicious, and followed the right process. Phoned the company up and said, "Look, just got this invoice through from you. Just want to check, did you send this?" "Oh, no, we haven't." So fantastic.
Yeah.
We've actually seen a really good example of that working, and potentially saved them about 20 to 30,000 pounds. So
Wow.
we're already starting to see those things taking place, and that's a great example of where a little bit of sort of care and attention, questioning perhaps some of the emails that you see coming in, can make a massive difference. 20 to 30,000 pound for a small or micro business can be catastrophic. So
Yeah.
just a simple check, taking a few moments, can make all that difference.
Sure. And I suppose then, we're talking a lot about really investing into your business, to make it more resilient. However, like you mentioned just then, it's a big cost if you don't, but it also is a big cost if you do invest into these sort of measures. For a smaller organisation, it can be a bit daunting, not knowing where to start as well. So I have to ask you, is there anything in the market that can really help with this?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think one of the things we're trying to do with lots of organisations is get them to see cyber resilience as an investment as opposed to a cost. And it's not just about protecting yourself against the most common types of risks that are out there, but it's hopefully demonstrating to your customers that you take their data seriously. It's demonstrating perhaps to suppliers, or even if you're a part of the supply chain, that you take cybersecurity seriously as well. And for me, it's also about, hopefully using that as an opportunity to allow your organization to grow, to innovate, to expand into new marketplaces. So we need to shift the debate from focusing very much on seeing cyber as a cost, as opposed to now seeing it more as a way of an investment that will help you grow your business, and develop it. So I think that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say, and this is really important for me, is about, again, going back to this, getting the basics right. So just by doing those simple things can make a huge difference. I was up with Microsoft a few weeks ago, and one of their staff came up with this slide, which had a fantastic statistic on it, which said 98% of cyber incidents can be prevented from implementing simple control measures.
Wow.
98%. So, that's a significant percentage that can be overcome by just doing
Yeah.
some of those basic things that I've mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and so you almost have to look at your results rather than the cost at hand, and change that perception. Instead of just focusing all that, this is going to really cost my business. You're already going to have that cost if you don't make the investment. But you just might save yourself all the hassle and like I say, the reputation damage, as an end result, as a positive. So we're speaking a lot about security in this, which goes hand in hand with data. And the insurance industry obviously has to manage data quite a lot. They have a lot of responsibility, with data, and protecting it. But how can they do this effectively?
Well, I'd start by saying I think the insurance industry is actually very good with data, and we often view it, certainly across policing and government, as a sector that handles data very well. and also understands what that data means and how that data can be used to illustrate certain trends or issues. So first of all, I'd say I think insurers are actually doing things very well. Perhaps one thing I wanted to focus on in relation to data, however, is to do with supply chains. And this is an interesting one. This is very much at the moment a topic of focus. The National Cybersecurity Centre issued some new guidance last month in relation to supply chain resilience. And we know that cyber criminals are now taking a much bigger interest in supply chains, simply because the larger organisations have understandably invested more heavily in their cyber resilience. And as a result of that, it's forcing those criminals to go to find weaker targets, often in that supply chain. So one of the things I would say in terms of managing data with insurers is about how you work with your supply chains. And I think we've moved on from where we were perhaps a few years ago, which is where there is either a small disregard for how suppliers manage data, to being one where it's more of a partnership. So actually, what I would like to see some of the larger organisations is, when they're working with smaller suppliers, actually spend some time with them, help them improve their cybersecurity, because ultimately, if they're less vulnerable, that's going to be less vulnerable to you as well. But as we know from recent government stats, sadly, the cyber breaches survey produced by the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, something like only 13% of businesses actually regularly review the security of their supply chain. So again, it's another example of making things really easy for cyber criminals. So supply chain resilience, working with your suppliers to look at how they manage data, particularly if they're transferring data to your organization, I would say is a really big focus at the moment, and something, if you haven't got a grip with, do it now.
Sure. Do you have any specific companies that you've noticed working with in the industry at all who have really benefited, and you've seen such a change by implementing this kind of structure in?
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously many companies out there who do things like that, but one in particular, which I was really impressed with recently, I sat on a panel at an event in London with MasterCard, and they were talking about how globally, I mean, you imagine the number of
Yeah.
suppliers that they have on an international basis, about how they actually embrace and work with their supply chains. And in fact, being a larger organisation, they're able to deploy resources to support the suppliers, ensure that they've got the relevant standards and security measures in place. And rather than seeing it as a review where they're striking suppliers off, they're encouraging a culture where suppliers actually feel comfortable saying, look, can you just help us out with this issue, or we're not sure what we're meant to be doing here, or how do we improve our cyber? So it's a real proper partnership and a relationship, and clearly that has some really good implications in terms of reduced risk for the likes of MasterCard. So I think
Sure.
that's a really good example, and one that I certainly encourage others to follow.
Sure, it's almost following those industry leaders in their footsteps, and just seeing the successes that they've had with it.
Absolutely.
We've talked a lot today about cyber resilience, training. We've even covered some threats. Do you feel that the board of insurance SMEs pay close enough attention to threats of cyber breaches? And are they doing enough, especially now that they've maybe got that added element of responsibility involved in the whole process?
Yeah, I would say insurance is all about risk, and I would say that probably the insurance sector is further ahead than many other industry sectors in terms of understanding the risk. There's an interesting debate at the moment about what level of responsibility do we put on board members around cyber. So there's discussions: do we actually bring in legislation as a country to mandate a boardroom director to have legal responsibility and accountability? So in the event of a cyber attack or a breach, they would
Yeah,
potentially be liable to criminal, certainly civil charges on that basis. So
sure.
there's some discussions, and I think, as with any forward-thinking nation, we always look to see what goes on an international perspective, and perhaps have a look at what's going on in the US first, and see how it may impact us in the UK. But I think, again, I go back to my point I've made earlier. One of the big things that boards can do in SMEs is just to make sure that you've got an incident response plan, to
Yeah,
regularly update and review it, and to exercise it, and ensure that the lessons learned from those plans and the exercises are fed back into the business. That's the really important thing, because we can put a lot of effort into prevention. If we are unfortunate enough to suffer an incident, it's about how you get back up and running as quickly as possible, and
sure.
regularly exercising that incident response plan is going to be the number one thing that's going to help you get back online.
Sure, it's not almost thinking if, it's thinking when, and how can I,
Yeah.
minimize the damages as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's why I think the focus has shifted from cybersecurity now to more cyber resilience. Hence, we're a cyber resilience centre and not a
Sure.
cybersecurity centre. Security is just about those measures that you put in place. Resilience is about not just those measures, but also about how you get yourself back up and running. And with 55% of crime now cyber and fraud related, the
Yeah.
likelihood of becoming a victim, unfortunately, it is a question, as you say, of when rather than if.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you know of really any companies in the insurance sector who've maybe not had the warning or the information now that they are maybe liable and they've found some trouble, or even those that have done the opposite and they have taken the proactive steps and they've seen success with that?
Yeah, I mean, I probably can't think of specific case studies, but what I would say
Sure.
when I engage with insurers, I'm really blown away by the way they want to work together. At the end of the day, these are often rival organisations, but there seems to be a real collaboration, and I guess that might be one of the reasons. They're obviously located generally around the same part of London, so there's a good networking sort of existence among them. But I think generally they're very good, and I would say that other industries can look at the insurance sector as a good benchmark of how they manage risk within their organisations, and hopefully feed that through to their customers as well.
Sure, sure. It's been great to talk to you about all these different the risks that insurers can face and the solutions that they can take. That they're not really on their own in this aspect. They can, let's say, go to you or others in the industry and support their teams to really combat something that's been more common in recent years because of the pandemic. So it's been great to discuss that with you today. Is there anything else you'd just like to add in at the end or mention? Is there anything you're promoting at the moment as well?
Thank you, George. Yeah, it's just two things really. So one of the things that all of the centres have got around the country is a free membership program that we've designed for small and medium-sized businesses. It's completely free. We're encouraging as many organisations to sign up to that as possible. Once you become a member, you get access to a range of free resources that are produced by the centres, by government and policing as well. And it's the simple stuff that helps them reduce their vulnerability to those risks that we've talked about. So please visit the Regional Cyber Resilience Centre websites and encourage you to sign up to those, and also your customers as well. The second thing I just wanted to mention very briefly in terms of what organisations can do, something that we've been working on for a little while now is a new initiative called CyberPath. And CyberPath is an initiative that is aimed at students who are studying cyber-related courses at some of the UK's leading universities. So what we do with those students is that we train them and they deliver some very basic, affordable cybersecurity services to SMEs across the country. So at the moment, we're working on things like web vulnerability assessments. We're also doing some security awareness training with the students, and there are a couple of other things as well that we'll be doing, such as policy reviews that organisations may have. The students are paid by us, they're supervised by us, they go in and do this piece of work. They produce reports, so they don't actually fix the things. The job is there really to identify potential risks and provide a very simple, clear report that the organisation could do something about. The nice thing about that is that by getting those students involved, we're giving them some commercial experience. We hope they will use that then and encourage them to become cybersecurity professionals and fill what is arguably a huge skills gap here in the UK at the moment in relation to cyber. So CyberPath is something you'll be seeing a lot more of in the next few months as we push that out through the Cyber
Sure.
Resilience Centre network.
Sure, and I suppose that is then a perfect match. Insurers always about identifying risks, and these students can do that for them. Thank you. We can link all of that as well in the
Brilliant.
description or any of our posts so that they can check out the link straight away. Are there any businesses that you specifically like to work with at the moment at all, or is it just generic?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I look at London, which is the area that I've got control, we've got 1 million SMEs in London, which is the fifth
Sure.
of the whole of the country. I am really interested in working with insurers. And the reason I'm interested in working with insurers is two reasons. One is that I think insurance plays an incredibly important role in the cyber resilience of an organisation. Why do I say that? Well, if you've got cyber insurance, as we all know, an SME's got somewhere they can turn to. Now, that may be getting some specialist help in relation to a particular incident that they are suffering. So that may be some legal expertise, it may be some communications expertise, if they're a larger SME in particular, and having to deal with customers, possibly even the media, and also access to some technical support. So many of the insurers will have networks of IT suppliers and cybersecurity vendors who can support them. So we want to work more and more with insurers for that reason, but also because of your customers, and we would encourage as many insurers as possible, both to sign up to our membership program, but also encourage your customers to sign up as well. And that's really important for us. The more people we get signing up to a membership program, hopefully the more people we're able to influence. And at the end of the day, what's really important for us are the outcomes. The government have a commitment around making the UK the safest place to do business online. That's what we've been set up to achieve. We're a key part of the government's new national cyber strategy, and that's one of the ways that insurers can get involved and help us achieve that vision.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you for coming on today, Simon. It's been great to cover all of these topics, and I'm sure the insurance industry is going to have so much value, and especially visiting the Cyber Resilience Centre to really identify those risks. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, George. Absolute pleasure.